On a cold night in April 1912, the most advanced ship on Earth disappeared beneath the Atlantic Ocean. More than 1,500 people died in the freezing darkness. But the real mystery is not just that Titanic sank, it's why the world believed it never could. At the beginning of the 20th century, technology was advancing faster than ever before. Engineers believed humanity had entered a new age of power and progress, and nothing represented that confidence more than a ship called the RMS Titanic. Stretching more than 269 meters across the water, Titanic was the largest moving structure humans had ever created. Built by the White Star Line, it was designed to be stronger, safer, and more luxurious than any ship that came before it. Newspapers proudly described it as practically unsinkable. Inside, the ship looked less like a vessel and more like a grand floating palace. First-class passengers walked down magnificent staircases beneath glowing chandeliers. They dined in elegant halls filled with fine silver and crystal glass. There were libraries, smoking rooms, restaurants, even a swimming pool. For the wealthiest travelers, Titanic offered comfort equal to the finest hotels in the world. But far below those luxurious decks were hundreds of passengers traveling in third class. Many were immigrants, leaving Europe in search of a new life in America. Their rooms were simple, their journey uncertain, but their hopes were enormous. Despite their different lives and dreams, everyone aboard Titanic shared the same destination. On April 10th, 1912, Titanic departed from Southampton, England, beginning its first voyage across the Atlantic Ocean. Thousands gathered at the harbour just to witness the enormous ship leave port. More than 2,200 passengers and crew were now part of this historic journey. For several days, the voyage went exactly as planned. The massive ship moved smoothly across the ocean, while passengers enjoyed the calm sea and fresh air. Crew members operated the vessel with quiet confidence. After all, Titanic had been designed with advanced, watertight compartments that were meant to keep the ship afloat, even if part of it flooded. But far ahead, in the dark waters of the North Atlantic, danger was slowly drifting south. On April 14th, several ships in the region began sending warnings. Large icebergs had been spotted directly along Titanic's route. Wireless operators aboard the ship received these messages throughout the day. Yet Titanic continued forward at nearly full speed. As evening approached, the temperature dropped rapidly. The ocean became unusually calm, almost perfectly still. And on that moonless night, the dark water made it nearly impossible to see what lay ahead. High above the ship, two lookouts stood in the crow's nest, scanning the horizon. Then, suddenly, at exactly 11:40 p.m., one of them saw something emerging from the darkness. A giant iceberg stood directly in the ship's path. The warning bell rang instantly. On the bridge, officers shouted orders. The wheel turned sharply. Engines were reversed, but Titanic was simply too large to move quickly. Seconds later, the iceberg scraped along the ship's side. From the deck, the collision felt surprisingly gentle, but below the surface, the damage was catastrophic. Steel plates along the hull had been torn open beneath the waterline. Freezing seawater began flooding into multiple compartments of the ship. At first, many passengers barely noticed anything unusual. Music still played in the lounges. Conversations continued over dinner. But deep inside the ship, engineers were already calculating the damage. And what they discovered was terrifying. Too many compartments were flooding. The ship that was supposed to be unsinkable was slowly filling with water. Titanic would not survive the night. Crew members began quietly preparing the movements. But there was a tragic moment. The ship carried lifeboats for only about half. At the time, maritime safety laws had not anticipated ships this large. Passengers were asked to put on life jackets and move toward the decks. Women and children placed into lifeboats first. Many passengers refused to believe the danger was real. Some lifeboats were lowered into the dark ocean, but were partially filled. Meanwhile, the ship's wireless operators began sending desperate distress signals across the Atlantic. Their message repeated again and again: Titanic is sinking. Hundreds of kilometers away, the passenger ship Carpathia received the signal and immediately turned toward the disaster. But it would take hours to reach them. Back on Titanic, the situation was getting worse. The front of the ship slowly dipped deeper into the icy water. Panic began spreading across the decks as passengers realized the truth. Yet even in those final moments, the ship's orchestra continued to play music in an attempt to calm the crowd. Crew members launched the last remaining lifeboats, and then time began to run out. By around 2 a.m., the bow of the ship had disappeared beneath the ocean. The stern lifted high into the cold night sky. The enormous vessel groaned under the pressure of its own weight. Then suddenly, with a violent crack, the ship broke apart. At 2:20 a.m., the Titanic slipped beneath the Atlantic Ocean forever. In just a few hours, the greatest ship of its time had vanished. More than 1,500 people were left in the freezing water. The temperature of the ocean was close to 0 degrees. For most victims, survival lasted only minutes. Hours later, the rescue ship Carpathia finally arrived. By then, only the lifeboats remained. About 700 survivors were pulled from the icy darkness and brought to safety. The rest were lost to the sea. News of the disaster spread around the world within days. People everywhere struggled to understand how such a tragedy could happen. Investigations soon revealed the mistakes that led to the catastrophe. Ships were now required to carry enough lifeboats for everyone on board. New international patrols began monitoring iceberg regions in the North Atlantic, but the story of Titanic was far from over. For more than 70 years, the location of the wreck remained unknown. Then, in 1985, an exploration team finally discovered it. Nearly 3,800 meters below the surface, the broken remains of the great ship still rest on the dark ocean floor. The grand staircase is gone. The lights are long extinguished. Only silence remains. Yet Titanic is more than just a shipwreck. It is a reminder of a moment when humanity believed technology had conquered nature. And on one cold night in April, the ocean quietly proved otherwise. More than a century has passed since Titanic disappeared, but somewhere in the darkness of the Atlantic Ocean, the wreck still waits. A frozen monument to ambition, tragedy, and the fragile limits of human confidence.